Okay, welcome back to Context. We are joined today by J.L. Reppert, Holy Cross men's lacrosse head coach. Thanks for being here today, Coach. Really excited to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, Justin. Can't wait to get going.
Fantastic. Let's get into it then. If you don't mind, I know you are in the first year of being the head lacrosse coach there at Holy Cross, but take us through your background as a coach, if you don't mind. How did you end up in the profession? What was the process for landing your first job? How'd you end up where you are now?
Thanks. Yeah, I took a little bit of a unique route, I guess you could say. So I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, which some would say is a hotbed of lacrosse. Others would talk about Long Island being a hotbed. So we won't have that conversation today. That could be a whole separate podcast. But I grew up, my dad was a lacrosse official. And so I grew up kind of nipping at his heels and going to all kinds of different great games and watching the game being played at the highest levels in college. Now we're fortunate in lacrosse. We have a couple professional leagues. So there is professional lacrosse. Back then there was not. Mm-hmm. And so there was this post-collegiate club league that was essentially all the guys that would have played professional were playing in this league. And I was around it. I was able to be up close and personal watching it and just fell in love with the sport. So I've always had a love for lacrosse. It's been a huge passion of mine and a super important part of my life. And has really opened doors and got me to meet people and do things that I wouldn't have without the sport. So that's kind of the sport part of it. Growing up, I always, again, loved to compete, loved anything that had to do with a ball. Went to the Naval Academy and played lacrosse there. And again, just kind of always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to be a coach. But I graduated from the Naval Academy and I went in the Marine Corps, served in the Marine Corps for 9 years. As part of that service, I was out at the Naval Postgraduate School and was able to spend some time in the Monterey Peninsula area, and actually coached at Stevenson School for a year with the great Coach Young. So I think, and that was one of the greatest things while I was in the Marine Corps. I had an idea I wanted to coach. I wanted to stay involved. I didn't know where it was going to take me. But I was fortunate everywhere I went, I was able to coach high school. So I was in San Diego for a bit and coached down there, was at RLS for a year while I was at school and coached there, was in the Pentagon and coached a couple high school teams there. So was able to kind of keep my feet wet and stay in the game, so to speak, and had the opportunity. Coach Tillman, who was at Harvard at the time, was my coach at Navy, and it was his second year at Harvard, and he had an opening, and it was about time for me to transition out, and everything worked out, and the timing was great. So fortunate that I was able to take that leap right away and get into college coaching and give a try at it, and have loved it. Was at Harvard for a bit, was at Washington College, which is a smaller school on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Great lacrosse tradition there. Went back to my alma mater and spent some time coaching at Navy. Was able to be there for 3 years, and then went to Maryland. Was there for 6 years, back with Coach Tillman again. So Coach Tillman's been a huge part of my coaching career and kind of life in lacrosse for a long time, and fortunate and feel so lucky that he gave me those opportunities. And then, I had the opportunity to come up to Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, and take over the program there, and got hired in January of this year, which was 4 days prior to the start of practice for the spring. So, always had a view towards getting a head coaching job, and done a lot to prepare myself, I thought, and get the experiences and then the knowledge that I needed for that. Never in my wildest dreams would I have anticipated taking over a program during a pandemic, let alone 4 days prior to the start of practice. So it certainly has been a unique journey. Have loved every bit of it. Have really been able to take lessons learned in each of my stops, and hopefully apply them to the program here for the Crusaders.
That's awesome. I'm really looking forward to hearing what it's been like for the last 4 months in this unique year. But I want to go back to the story of being in the service, right? So you're at the Naval Academy, which is a whole different deal than the average student is going to go through. And then from there, you opt into the Marines versus the traditional Navy, and you do that, and you're in there for 9 years. What and how were you able to apply the lessons you learned through lacrosse to that experience? And what, I don't want to say allowed for, but I guess what was the impetus behind the pivot out of the service where you'd already done half of the 20 you need to graduate to retire in theory to, I'm going to go try this coaching thing?
I think, again, people have told me you want to find your passion and something where you wake up every day and it doesn't feel like you're going to work. It feels like you're doing what you love. And the Marine Corps was that for me, certainly for a long time. I think the longer, just in my experience in the Marine Corps and my job at the time, the longer I was going to be in the Marine Corps, the less I was going to lead Marines, which was my favorite part about being a Marine. And so I could kind of see that trajectory. And as I mentioned, my passion and my love was lacrosse and coaching and getting into that side of things, and just felt like the timing was right. Had I stayed and retired, I think I would have had too many other responsibilities and been too old at the time to be able to take that leap. And again, it was in some ways I was in the Marine Corps for 9 years, and then you change jobs, and this is probably like this in a lot of places, but I changed careers, so to speak, and had to start over. And so there's only so many opportunities, I think, in life to take advantage of that stuff, and felt like that was a window that cracked open, and I had to go through it. I think in terms of lessons learned in lacrosse that apply to the Marine Corps, it's all similar. It's all very much the same. The Marine Corps is one big team that is made up of smaller teams that help them compete as a big unit. And so that was one of the things that attracted me to the Marine Corps. Is I felt like it was going to be another extension of my lacrosse team. It's physical. A lot of it is hands-on. You're out in the field. You're doing that kind of stuff. It's aggressive. There is a huge teamwork element to it. And that was the attraction that I had going into the Marine Corps. And I was fortunate. I had a bunch of great coaches growing up that put the lessons in lacrosse terms that were going to help me moving forward. And so I just kind of utilized those lessons, and certainly, again, I'm not going to get into these debates and arguments, but you could argue that the Marine Corps is one of the finest leadership and training organizations in the world. We like to jokingly say we're undefeated. And so I think learning those lessons through the Marine Corps was tremendous.
Perfect segue. So you get dropped in here after a long journey to being the head coach at Holy Cross. And even as you reverse engineer the steps that you took as an assistant coach to get here, getting exposed behind the curtain, here's how you run a program, here's how you do this. I've got experience at Harvard, Washington College, Naval Academy, Maryland, longtime assistant. I'm ready to go. And now here it's my turn. What did you realize immediately that you still needed to figure out when you took over?
That's happening on a daily basis right now. The biggest thing that I think I've had to be aware of, that I guess I had an appreciation for but didn't really know, is how much of a tone the head coach sets for the program. And it's reflecting back to my Marine Corps experience and my Pentagon experience. In the Pentagon, I was doing a lot of I don't know, grunt work, whatever, kind of. I wasn't quite getting coffee, but it was close. And there, if a general walks down the hall and verbalizes a thought, everyone behind him scampers and makes that thought happen. And am I comparing myself to a general? No, but in some respects, you are in terms of a coach and leading a team. And anything you say, people are latching onto and really paying attention to way more than when you're an assistant coach. And so I think that's been the biggest thing that I've had to constantly remind myself of is just the importance of your words and not only your words, but your delivery and your tone. And again, learning from Coach Tillman, he was great at this, just bringing the energy every day. As a head coach, that's your responsibility. And everybody's going to follow from there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great thing to point out, and something you're not always aware of until you have that eye-opening moment of, oh, wait, that was just a suggestion. That wasn't a mandate.
Yeah.
Well, but you're in charge. So that becomes a dictate, something that has to be done. And, when I got in this role as the athletic director, all of a sudden I'm having conversations with my coaches the same way that I would normally as a colleague, and they're landing very differently. And it's like, no, I'm the same guy. Like, what are you talking? So I think figuring that out is super important. And the tone you set and the culture that you're trying to build as you come in and you land and you're bringing pieces of these other programs with you is an evaluation process. As you said, I'm figuring it out every day. What would you say then throughout your entire journey of being at different places and heck, being in the military for so long, what would you say is the best thing that you do? I'm going to say as a program, even though you're just starting this program, but maybe that you're bringing with you from before. Say, hey, I don't care where I'm coaching, this is going to happen, and here's why.
Oh man, I think there's so many things that have been swirling around and ideas. I think we like to talk about, a lot of times people will say lead by example. And that's one thing that, again, through my Marine Corps development and talking to folks and my mentors, there is no such thing as leading by example. The proper term from my perspective is you have to set the example. And so I think that has been something that we've really talked about here is setting the example. But if you're setting the example and nobody's doing what you're doing, you're not leading them. They're not following you. So understanding that difference. And I think, so that's kind of the first part. I also think, and this is where it comes to trying to lead, 18 to 22-year-olds in my situation, 14 to 18-year-olds probably in your realm. There's such an important focus on friendship and wanting to be liked. And, it's that old adage, would you rather be liked or would you rather be respected? And I think if you set the example, people are going to respect you. The next level to take the team to where you want it to go and kind of keep improving is, being able to understand I'm a teammate first, which means what I do, what I'm asking you to do is upholding the standards of the team. And, we can be friends off the field and hang out. But my role as a teammate is to get us to maximize our potential. And I think, to me, peer leadership is one of the hardest things to do. And the more, again, it's like you talk about, well, seniors led this team or the players took over this team. To me, that a lot of that is just peer leadership. The more you can get guys having peer leadership, the better. Yeah. And we talk about accountability here. And, again, part of it is, I think a lot of times everybody thinks, well, if you're going to hold a guy accountable, you have to be a jerk about it, or it has to be like delivered in the wrong way. It's like, no, I'm not being a jerk. Like, I'm just saying, dude, you put the wrong pair of socks on. You got to wear white, not black. To me, that's just, there's a way you can do it. And the delivery is so important. And the other side of that, Justin, is the person that is getting held accountable needs to be a great teammate and accept that accountability. Again, I reflect back more on my Marine Corps experience. I walk down the hallway in the Pentagon. The expectation for me as a lowly captain who was like a nothing there is if I see a 4-star general who is like the greatest there and he has something wrong with his uniform, the expectation is I go, "Hey, sir, just so you know, like this is off." And I would say 9 times out of 10, not always, but 9 times out of 10, those guys will say, "Oh man, I appreciate it. Thank you so much." And they're appreciative because we're I'm not I'm not allowing him to go outside in public and represent the Marine Corps in a bad light wearing something wrong with his uniform. So again, a small example, but man, it is so hard to execute.
Mhm.
And if you can get that to me, that's where the teams start kind of taking over their own, and the coaches don't have to be quite as involved in that accountability part.
Right. I like the idea that you brought up, the age old adage of liked versus respected. And there's so many complexities that go into that, especially as the coach, because often your likability depends more on whether or not they're getting playing time than anything you're doing outside of that. So you can do everything right and they're not good enough to get on the field, and all of a sudden you're disliked. So if you're putting your eggs in that basket, it's a fool's errand. It's the idea that you said, here are the standards. My job is to uphold the standards, and that's not going to waver no matter what. And long term, you're now embedding these lessons that are going to carry with these guys well beyond their playing career, that are going to serve them in life. And ultimately, that respect piece may or may not become likability, but it really doesn't matter because you can't win that battle no matter what. So I love the fact that you've just, not decided, but one of your core values is, how do we create these systems where the athletes are holding one another accountable and it's not just dictatorial and top down, because those are ultimately the teams that are going to be most successful. Now, again, you have a unique experience being in not just the Marine Corps, but you were a what do they call midshipman, right? At the academy, and you got to see the different teams that were there. You're at the University of Maryland, big ACC school across the board. You get to see these really successful teams.
Big Ten, we changed.
Oh, Big Ten, my fault. You got a chance to see these really successful teams competing at the Power 5 or the elite level. What have you learned potentially that you're able to apply to your lacrosse coaching from watching non-lacrosse teams train, play, practice, organize? Are there things you've been able to steal and implement as a lacrosse coach?
Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of it has to do with, and again, I think a lot of people talk about this. It's easy to talk about and hard to execute. Consistently competing every day. And again, it's, hey, it was funny. I was talking to our guys about it today. You talk about, hey, we got to work hard. We got to grind. To me, those are kind of like, yes, they're necessary terms we use, but they're kind of have a negative connotation. Like the teams that I've watched and that have been great enjoy that. They enjoy the work. It's not work. It's what we do around here is we just go out and we play as hard as we can and we compete every single day. And it's not about, well, are we going to have an easy practice today? Are we going to have a hard practice? Is this drill going to be easy? Or, oh man, are we going to run sprints later today? Should I coast so I can run sprints? Or, hey, this team, we're getting ready to play. Oh man, they're going to be really hard. Like, I don't know. I'm not sure if I'll go into it, or vice versa. The best teams that I've seen, witnessed, and learned from just go and they just compete. And those guys walking down the hallway, like they'll just race and elbow each other and knock each other into the wall to get to the front of the door. So I think that's one of the biggest things is just the compete factor. And this is something that Alan Stein Jr. talks about a lot, is the unseen hours. And the great teams, the great players work hard and are dedicated and dominate the unseen hours.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's not about showing up at practice for 2 hours. That is not going to get you to where you need to go, unfortunately. It is what you're doing after practice, before practice, days off, those kinds of things. And again, that sounds like a lot, which it is. If you want to be good, you got to invest. But if you look at it from a school perspective, going to class every day, that's like going to practice. And you don't get great grades by just showing up. Well, some people can. Most people can't just show up at class and get great grades. They have to do homework. They have to talk to their teachers or their professors. There's extra stuff they have to do. No different than an athletic playing field.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great analogy. And you're right. I mean, if you think about anyone's academic career, there are those that go to class, break out the books, study for additional hours, and probably achieve at a high level. And there are those of us that show up to class on test day and see what happens. And it doesn't always work out great.
And frankly, some of those guys get away with it, but eventually that will catch up to them.
100%.
They're not maximizing their potential. They may be getting great grades, but they should be getting 100% on those tests if they were to go as hard as they could.
Absolutely. Yeah, we got to avoid that C's get degrees approach, but some of us fall into that when, you got other things going on. But let's just leave that alone for right now. This isn't about me and my journey. So how would you say that your approach to coaching has changed over the years? This is where I was when I was younger and fresh out of the military, and down the road, however many years now, this is where I'm at. And here's why.
I think one of the biggest things that I think I've had to learn is it goes back to setting the example. And I've always thought that you shouldn't ask people, whether you're leading them or coaching them or whatever, you shouldn't ask people to do what you're not willing to do yourself, which I completely 100% continue to agree with. The difference and where I've kind of changed that is that doesn't mean you have to do it. And, I think being willing to do it and here and there doing it is fine. But as you elevate, and I'm learning this as a head coach, there are other things that I need to be doing to help our program. It doesn't mean I'm not willing to do the carry a goal or set up cones. It's just by not doing that, I'm freed up to do bigger things to advance the program. So your roles change. And I think when I was a younger coach, I felt like I confused activity for achievement. And so I felt like I had to be yelling all the time and running around all the time. And if you don't have a hoarse voice at the end of a game, you didn't coach that hard. And I think it's the goal of coaching is to have your players execute on game day. And if you could say nothing on game day and your players execute, you've done your job as a coach. And that's something where I've learned a lot. Again, part of it is in high school, when I was coaching there, you don't have as many practices. So you're kind of having to coach through a game because that's almost like a practice in some ways. At the college level, typically, in lacrosse, we're much like a football schedule where it's one game a week. And so there is a lot more development time. And so the guys should have, again, it goes back to that academic analogy, like the guys should have the fundamentals and the tools to be able to take the test on game day.
I love that analogy, and you're dead on. In the high school environment, often that game is just a glorified practice in regards to mindset. Now, it's not for the kids, but these dates where arbitrarily there is a game sometimes get in the way of whatever you're trying to do development wise. And so you're trying to utilize it as another practice. But you're right. If you really take a step back, the hay's out of the barn the minute that ball goes up or they're on the ground fighting for a face off there in lacrosse, that is not a whole lot you can do at that point. Maybe call a timeout, maybe give some encouragement, but it's not like you're implementing some new strategy mid game. So I think that's really intelligent. The other thing you said that lands for me is the idea of, look, you got to set the example and you got to be willing to do every part of this job. And if you're still doing all of those things, one, you're not allowing your assistants to grow. Two, you're not allowing your athletes to grow. And three, you're not getting any of the things done that you need to get done because you're in there breaking down video because you're not trusting the person that's their job to do that. And now all of a sudden you're not getting scheduling done. You're not getting fundraising done. You're not getting any of the big stuff done that the head coach really needs to focus on. So I think those are really important for new coaches to note, that there's a certain aspect of having your fingerprint on the program, and there's a certain aspect of, hey, I got to grow these other people so that they can do their job without me interfering. When you think about your career as a coach, as a professional, heck, as an athlete, it doesn't really matter what realm you want to couch this in, but is there a failure that stands out for you that was transformational in how you see your job now? And because of this incident, because of this circumstance, I now have the tools to deal with whatever's coming down the road.
There are too many failures to count and to rehash in this podcast. I'll tell you that right now. It's interesting. And I know you kind of brought this question up in advance and thinking about it. I think one of the things that stands out to me is one of the first few years I was coaching college. And I was still trying to, I guess, in some ways find my way, not completely confident about things. And I came into a situation where there were some players that had prior reputations for the good. Hey, you're going to love this kid. He does X, Y, and Z. He is great. He is awesome. And I allowed that judgment, and I assumed what I was going to get out of that player. And I guess that's the word that I would use in this learning part, is just assuming. So I allowed him unintentionally to do some things and create some rope for himself, and didn't hold him accountable because I was assuming the best out of him. And it was middle of his career. And I felt like it was almost like the cat was out of the bag. I couldn't get the cat back in because I didn't establish it right away. Mm-hmm. And had I had a conversation with him early, again, to that point, like, I didn't have to be a jerk. I didn't have to have him hate me. And just have a conversation. Hey, I'm hearing all these great things about you, but I'm seeing these things and they just don't seem to match up. What's going on? I never had that conversation. And I reflect back, and I feel like because I held him back, and I didn't push him and coach him as much as I could have. And that's one of the things that I look back on big time. And I reflect on a lot, and something that I've tried to do with our players, I've tried to do with our coaches, is be upfront, be direct, and be to the point, and do my best not to allow any ambiguity or assumptions from the receiver of the message. Even though it may be hard for them to understand, trying to get to a point where they build that relationship. They understand I care about them. And because I care about them, this is what I'm saying. So I think that would be the biggest one that I look back on often and reflect on and try to improve there.
That's really interesting to me objectively, right? As I hear you describe your career in the military, and I know what the chain of command looks like there and what the standards are and what the expectation is, and probably the lack of filter that's on a lot of the conversation in regards to, here's what you need to be doing. And so as you sit here and you explain that, how would you say that your upbringing there and the culture in which you were brought into as a young career person then influenced the way in which you're approaching those difficult conversations now, or that you kind of shied away from them because man, I've gone through this enough that this individual should know this, or I want to figure out a different way to land this so it's received better than it was for me?
I think it's a lot of it is in the delivery. And again, I think one thing that I talked to our guys coming in here, and this was something that growing up as a young Marine Corps officer, you have enlisted folks who are by rank structure junior to you, but have been in the Marine Corps 18, 20 years and are way more experienced and know a lot more than you maybe will ever know, and probably have forgotten more than you'll ever know. And so, one of those master sergeants, they're called in the Marine Corps, talked to me, and it was, you need to treat people fairly and you need to be consistent, but you should never treat them the same. Because it's just like a fingerprint. No one individual, no one case is ever the same. And again, somewhat of a weird analogy, but two guys go in and rob a bank. They rob the same amount of money at the same bank. One guy has a family who hasn't eaten in 4 weeks and he doesn't have a job and he is just desperate. The other guy has robbed 50 banks in his illustrious career. Like, those guys on the surface did the exact same thing. Those guys but need to be created. If you're a great leader, they need to be treated completely differently. And I think understanding that, and then also understanding just the messaging needs to be different. We all know as coaches, some guys love the swift kick in the rear end. Some guys, you got to put your arm around them and hug them and say, you're great, you're great, you're great. You're going to be even more great if you do this. So I think that's been the biggest thing, that in terms of that and the delivery, while I am direct, I try to understand how different people operate, and what they're gonna accept as the message and how it's delivered.
No, great analogy. People just jumping in might be like, what are you talking about bank robbers for? But I think the idea here is that this master sergeant, who is in theory your junior, is coaching you. He's like, hey, listen, Captain, this is what you need to know if you want to be successful. And I think that's an important feedback loop, right? To get the boots on the ground telling you, hey, this is what you need to know as a leader. And the idea that be fair, be consistent, never treat people the same falls into that coaching category of, hey, fair is not equal. And, you get hung up on this idea of fairness or equality. It can really inhibit your growth. And you need to focus on, hey, what's the task? What's the goal? What's the outcome? How is the best way to get there? And what's good for Johnny might not be good for Billy. And we're going to figure this thing out. So using that as a segue, and this question's a little bit out of left field and an outlier, and so you can answer it in whatever context you want. But what would you say you have most recently changed your mind on from a coaching standpoint or just in life? Like, hey, this is where I was. And now, after reflection or growth or maturity, now I'm over here. And here's why.
Man, yeah, that's a tough one. I think one of the things, and I kind of alluded to it in an earlier answer, confusing activity for achievement. I grew up, I guess, in the Marine Corps and throughout my athletic life, like work harder, work harder, work harder, do more, do more, do more. And I think have kind of changed that sometimes less is more. And it's about the bottom line, and it's not about comparison. And had a mentor of mine that's kind of helped guide me through these last couple months and talk to our team a little bit. And one of the things he talks about, and he gave the reference, and I forget where it is, so I'm just going to say it, but they talked about a ranking mindset, and how a ranking mindset, you're holding yourself back. You're just comparing yourself. So it's, well, I'm working harder than him, so I should be more successful. Well, no, you're just in the office longer. It doesn't mean you're working harder. Hey, we're practicing 2 hours a day. We're maximizing our whole time. Like, this is great. I I think I've changed on that. I think being more efficient, being more effective is more important than just punching the clock. I've never been a guy that wanted to punch the clock, but after reflecting and being in a different chair now, I guess I should say I never thought of myself as that guy, but maybe I was more than I thought. And I think being efficient and effective with your time is just so important, whether you're in practice, meeting with your staff, talking to your guys, just trying to do that, I think is one of the things that I don't know if I've changed, but focused more on recently.
Yeah. Preach, because ultimately that transcends not just the office work, not just the practice field, but pretty much everything you do, right? The idea of confusing busyness for productivity, right? Or in your case, activity for achievement. And, if you even think about just practice timing and, hey, we need to be in the gym or on the field for 3 hours to be productive. And I'm at this point, it's like, no, nobody here practices more than 90 minutes. If you're not getting it done, you need to be a better coach. And it's not something that really occurred to me until I got into a situation where, hey, these kids are getting pulled in a million different directions at a prep school. And how are we going to find time to get this done? So how do you embrace kind of the Tim Ferriss minimum effective dose of getting things done? And at the same thing in the office, like, the glorification of the NFL football coach that's in the office at 4:30 a.m. until 9 p.m. It's like, yo, man, you're not being very efficient. How do you do that in a way that is not going to impose on everyone else? To what you said, it's about productivity. It's about outcome. And if I can get it done in 2 hours, great. It shouldn't need to take me 8 hours. And that's a great way to look at the world. And I was just talking to someone yesterday, actually, about going through emails. And it's like, you don't need to answer all of these. Just archive 70% and just don't respond. Someone else will take care of it. And so it's like, how do you turn that switch to help yourself become the most productive version and the most impactful version that you can to help the student athletes that you are leading? So taking all of that and thinking about where you are now and 4 months into this illustrious head coaching career, if you could go back to the beginning, jump in the DeLorean with Doc Brown and figure out how to get back to when you were just getting into this thing, what advice would you have for your younger self to help you get to the place you are now from a mindset standpoint?
I would summarize it by saying, ask more, listen more, and talk less. And just be a learner. I think it seems to be kind of cliche, I guess, maybe overstated, but just the relationships are so vital, and connections. And again, you can use connections however you want, but getting those people around you. And again, I feel like I did a decent job listening to master sergeants and people, but I didn't seek enough knowledge. And I think that would be the thing that I would say is just seek more knowledge and don't worry about proving yourself. Just be you. And you don't have to always talk. Listen more.
On that note, however, I would say it is the disease of being a young coach where you feel that you have to prove yourself and you're struggling with imposter syndrome, or you're struggling to figure out and have the security to feel confident to do the things you just described, right? Most young coaches are going to veer away from asking for help for the fact they think they need to prove themselves, or they're not secure enough to ask for help. So how would you describe or advise is the best way to get over that feeling? Because we all carry that with us, right? Until we get to that place of authenticity and security. And now all of a sudden we're all asking for help. Whereas the young coach is in their box, like, I'll try to figure it out.
I think the first thing that, and again, great advice when I took this job, great advice before then was just be you. We all read the John Wooden books. We all read Vince Lombardi. We got them on the wall. Like, we got these sayings, and, I still get chills and get emotional listening to Jimmy Valvano speak on the ESPYs, like all of that stuff. And you can take slivers of that, but you got to be you. Right. And you know, if you're not, then you're gonna be the imposter. So just be you. I would say would be the first thing, which is again really hard to do as you're trying to break in. The other thing, and somebody several years ago gave me this advice: people like to talk about themselves. I mean, shoot, I'm on this podcast talking about myself for an hour, and it's like nothing, right? So people like to talk about themselves. Again, it's just ask questions, and there's ways. To me, it's a skill to be able to ask questions and listen in the right way, and then be observant enough to ask the next question. Yeah. And you're going to get your answers just by doing that. And probably if you ask enough questions, they're not going to ask you. And so that you don't have to show that you're ignorant or not, and you're done, and you get what you need. So, I guess that's the biggest thing is just don't be, and I was that guy. I was afraid to ask. It's like, oh my gosh, like they're going to think I don't know, or this is so intimidating. I got a long way to go. I got a lot to learn for sure. But the people at the highest levels were us at one time. We've never been them, but they've been us. And I think for the most part, I found this is why I love coaching. Most coaches are willing to help other coaches.
No, great advice. And I'm going to end on this. The idea of ask questions, then ask the next one, then ask the next one is basically what we're doing here is, hey, here's this list of things that I think is important to coaches in general. These questions. How do I get a bunch of these answers and deliver them? And so it's almost like anyone that's really looking to grow can repurpose this idea, especially in the Zoom environment, and get, hey, these are the 3 things I'm wrestling with. Let me just dial up a bunch of these conversations and ask. And now I got this database of things to help guide me. So I think obviously we're doing this. That's a great way to look at it. And the other thing you said, which I think is one of the biggest hurdles for coaches to get over, is people want to help. They just often don't have the access to do so. So if you're willing to ask, very rarely is some coach going to give you the Heisman and, say, I don't have time for you. They like to hear themselves talk. They like to talk through things to figure out what they really believe. And if you ask, you're generally going to get help. And to the point where one of the things that we've been able to do with the coaching circle around here is, the rival basketball coach is in my huddle film program and I'm in his, and we go through and watch, and then we get on the phone and we talk, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And it's not like this secret. It's like, how are we helping one another grow? So your biggest rival per se is probably your best source of information if you're willing to be vulnerable and lean into that.
Absolutely. Which again is a hard thing. We, as coaches, we want to hide information, and I'm guilty as charged. Like, hey, I put that thing on a lock and key and don't share it. The more you share, the more you, this is a life lesson, I guess. The more you share, the more you get back, really. Yep.
100%. Well, Coach, thanks for being here today. I really enjoyed this. I know you got some big things you got to wrestle with there, and appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Thanks so much, Justin. It was great.